Da 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 da. Welcome to disenFRIENDSchised. I'm Karen Mathison, author and founder of The Naked Grief, and this is disenFRIENDSchised, the podcast that reveals the disenfranchised grief hidden in every single Friends episode. Today we're diving into Season 2, Episode 21, the one with the bullies. On the surface, it's a goofy romp through coffee house seat stealing and 1950s diners, but underneath, it's a masterclass in the grief of financial failure, the sting of being replaced by a parent, and the regression that we all feel when our sense of safety is threatened. So this episode, we have 3 distinct storylines. They're all vibrating with a sense of unrecognized loss. First, we have Monica, our high-achieving, hyper-organized chef, currently unemployed and down to her last pennies. To avoid the humiliation of a survival job in a 1950s diner, the Moondance Diner, she decides to play the stock market with her remaining savings. She isn't looking at PE ratios. She's buying CHP because of Eric Estrada and ZXY because it sounds sexy. So spoiler alert, she does lose it all. The grief here is palpable. The loss of her professional status and her financial agency. Then there's Phoebe. She sets out to find her biological father, Frank Buffet Sr., and she uses the quirkiest, quote, signs to indicate that now is the time for her to try and catch up with her dad. Things like walking by a buffet and they're serving all-you-can-eat Franks, and she's stretching it to say, because his name's Frank, and his last name's Buffet. But the universe and a very persistent Jack Russell Terrier seem to be telling her to stay away. After accidentally running over the dog, Phoebe ends up at the house, only to discover that her dad didn't just disappear, he's moved on. He went out for groceries years ago and never came back. He had a whole other life, a whole other son. And Phoebe isn't just grieving the father who left, she's grieving the daughter she didn't get to be for him while he was being a dad to someone else. Finally, we have Ross and Chandler, 2 grown men who are suddenly stripped of their sacred space at Central Perk, the sofa, by 2 bullies. This sounds like a sitcom trope, but the grief here is about the loss of safety and the regression into childhood fear. When you're an adult, you're supposed to have moved past the take it outside phase of life, but these guys find themselves mourning their dignity over a stolen hat, as well as a stolen place in their favorite hangout. So now let's play Name the Disenfranchised Grief. Why do we call the grief in the episode disenfranchised? Because if Monica told someone she was grieving her bank account, they'd just tell her to get a job. If Chandler said he was mourning his hat, they'd tell him to go buy a new one. But grief isn't about the thing, it's about the meaning attached to the thing. Financial shame grief. This is the specific mourning of who you were when you had money versus who you are when you're forced to put on a blonde wig and fake boobs to dance to YMCA on a counter. Monica isn't just broke, she's experiencing status grief. Our society ties our value to our net worth and our job title. I mean, she was a head chef, and now she's going to go be a line cook that has to wear a costume. That's a huge step, a huge change. When those are stripped away, we experience a soul-crushing identity crisis that no one recognizes as legitimate loss. It's often accompanied by emotional burnout as the person tries to hustle their way out of a hole that is actually an emotional pit. This resonates with me very hard. I left the corporate world a couple of years ago, or I was asked to leave the corporate world a few years ago because I was going through my own set of grief. And I looked at, as Phoebe looked for signs, I looked at it as my way of saying, okay, now it's time. It's time for me to step into what I went to school for and stop hiding behind accompany and represent myself and my passion and my purpose to help others through their grief. What's tough is when you don't have that steady paycheck and you're building something that you want to be the strongest support system that it can be, you teeter every single day. Everything looks the same, but it's really on how you get out of bed and how you choose to look at what you're building. You can look at it as not performing because you're still building it and feel defeated and deflated, or you can look at it as this new day of opportunity, rebuilding, expanding, and tweaking. And every single day I have to coach myself through the right perspective to continue this journey. And that's what Monica's doing. She wants to avoid going back into a job that she knows isn't her. Even if it's temporary, it's not what she wants to do. It's not her drive. So she's determined to find another way to get to where she wants to be or back to where she once was. And that struggle is real. Any one of us that has left a job and started new somewhere else, taking a pay cut, being the new person, the low person on the totem pole, like all of those things, it's a huge adjustment. And the older we get, it's more of a challenge than it was. Sometimes our bosses are the age of our kids. And that's challenging too, because we may know more on some levels, but they may know more on others. How many of you actually have to rely on your kids to do any kind of technical stuff with your computers, your video games, your remote controls? Because we didn't grow up that way, especially us Gen Xers. But anyway, I digress. The abandonment pivot, the replacement grief that Phoebe's going through. She experiences a brutal realization that her father wasn't just incapable of being a father. He was just incapable of being her father. Sort of. Because he did still abandon his son, too. So, he was there longer, but he still wasn't there the whole time. Finding out that he had a son, and that he stayed for at least a little while with the family is a secondary trauma. This is replacement grief. It's the feeling that you weren't enough to make someone stay, even though you can clearly see that they were capable of staying for someone else. We often see this even in relationships. Maybe you were with someone for a long time, or maybe not even that long, and everything felt right, but it didn't work out. And not long after, they moved on, they've moved in with somebody, or they got married, and you're thinking, how was I not enough? Because I thought it was pretty darn good. That's replacement grief. And then we have the analysis of the friend support. In this episode, the support system is a bit of a mixed bag, as always. Joey and Rachel accompany Phoebe to her father's house, which is a classic holding space move. They sit in the cab, and they endure the olive loaf and ham spread sandwiches, a classic Joey move, and they don't judge Phoebe when she's too scared to go to the door. And this is great support. They are physically present for the messy parts of her journey. However, when it comes to Monica, the group is a bit more dismissive. They joke about her opportunity to validate how hard it may be for a professional chef to serve Laverne and curly fries to strangers. And they joke about her sexy stock options and try and convince her to go over to that diner job. They see it as a funny plot point. Monica sees it as a failure of her life's trajectory. And the guys, Ross and Chandler, their support for each other is really just shared trauma. Trauma bonds are real too, folks. They validate each other's fears, which is helpful, but they also feed into each other's regression. Sometimes commiserating can keep us stuck in the grief of our lost dignity rather than helping us reclaim it. So do you remember that one scene when they're back at Chandler's apartment having cappuccino with a K and it's not getting all frothy? And Chandler looks at the box and goes, no, keep moving it. Stir and drink, stir and drink. You're giving up the experience of Central Perk, an environment that you're comfortable in, and sacrificing it for an apartment where the cappuccino is with a K and you've got to stir and drink in order to make it even taste remotely as good as what you were getting at your favorite hangout, the coffee house. Some coaching moments and what ifs. If I were coaching Monica through her financial shame, the first thing I'd do is reframe the Moondance Diner job. Survival jobs are not permanent identities. And they're not. When you're in a season of less than, acknowledge the loss of the more than version of yourself. It's okay to hate the diner. It's okay to cry in the walk-in fridge. But don't let the uniform swallow your soul. Treat it as a bridge to the next chapter. It's a learning experience. The first big career pivot that I did when I left my world of food service, I went into banking. Took a pay cut, but I had a very steady schedule. I had a couple hours that I have to work on a Saturday, but I had most of my weekend free, which was great because as I was coming up and starting a family, it was the right move. Food service, it's sporadic. You have a lot of crazy hours. You're pretty much guaranteed to work every holiday and weekend. And if you are trying to have a balance in life, that only works if you're with somebody that has that same kind of job. Or if they're very much in love with you and can find a way to balance it. And then I made a drastic move and went into death care, where it was a minimum wage job plus commission. And it was a steady paycheck, but it wasn't much of a steady paycheck. And that was a huge shock. But it was a great learning experience because now with where I'm at, I can look back at that and develop things that can help the companies that I worked with to find better ways to support their team, to make it stronger and more supportive for their personal challenges so they can show up for the families that they're trying to support. So for Phoebe, meeting Frank Jr. is a confusing milestone. She's grieving the sibling bond that they never had while trying to build a new one from scratch. When meeting a long-lost family member, give yourself permission to grieve the missing years. You don't have to be happy that you found them or that it's been so long since you've seen them. You can be angry if it has been a long time, or maybe that you had to take the initiative to reconnect or connect at all. But you can be sad about the shared memories that you don't have. But you can also learn to pivot that and embrace the new memories that can be created and work together to be stronger, to have a bond that can be built for a good future relationship. Relatable real life examples, I've already shared a bunch, but we're going to go a little deeper. We see these types of unrecognized grief all the time in the real world. And think about the professional who gets laid off after 20 years and has to take an entry-level position just to keep the lights on. This is financial shame. It's financial shame grief, really. It's the quiet, heavy feeling of being overqualified and undervalued. It leads to emotional burnout because you're working twice as hard to maintain a facade that you're fine when you're actually mourning your career. Think about the person who finds a half-sibling through a DNA test. Everyone expects it to be a joyous reunion, but for many it's a reminder of a parent's secret or a childhood spent in the dark. It's replacement grief in a modern wrapper. Or more commonly, think about the family members that we lose contact with, that we haven't heard from in years. and how hard it is to make the effort to actually reach out and reconnect because you're afraid of getting that door slammed in your face. You're afraid that the connection's broken. And fear can truly hold us stagnant. Chandler and Ross, they took their fear and left the coffee house because these bullies threatened them, and they felt like it was better to just hide. Life's too short. We're all kind of guilty of it. I'm sure that you can name several situations right now that you're kind of hiding from. I know I can. But if we take this episode and actually think about what they did different, or what they could have done different, maybe we can apply that in our own lives. And the irony with the bullies is when the four guys finally decide to hash it out and they go outside and they put all of their personal belongings, keys, anything sharp into a hat, and they are ready to go at it. And then these other two guys walking along the street just decide to take the hat. It goes from being angry at each other to now unifying and going after the guys that just stole their belongings. It's not really a friendship that was formed, but they ended up forgiving each other and sharing space, which is kind of cool when you think about it. In our next episode, we're tackling season 2, episode 22, the one with two parties, where we see the absolute chaos that ensues when you try to keep two grieving divorced parents in separate rooms. It's a masterclass in triangulation and the heavy lifting children of divorce do to keep the peace. If you're struggling with your own unrecognized losses, whether it's a job, a relationship, or just your sense of self, head over to thenakedgrief.com. We have resources to help you strip away the stigma and see your grief for what it truly is, a valid part of your human experience. Check out our full podcast full podcast archive on YouTube at The Naked Grief. And don't forget to subscribe to the disenFRIENDSchised feed for more honest talk about mental health and our favorite sitcom. Stay honest, stay messy, and remember, it's okay to mourn the sexy version of your life while you're busy dancing on the counter. We'll see you next time. Da 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 da.